These images shocked the world. On Friday, the 8th of March 2024, aid being dropped into the northern Gaza by Americans, Jordanians, Egyptians, French, Dutch and Belgian air forces killed 5 Palestinians after a parachute failed to deploy. Before the aid drop, another shocking incident took place. On the 29th of February 2024, as hungry Palestinian civilians gathered around food aid trucks in Gaza City, Israel's occupational forces opened fire, killing over 100 people. While many condemned these two events, far less attention has been paid to the reason why Gazans needed and continue to need the aid. Israel has waged a war on Gaza since October 2023. Over 36,550 Palestinians have been killed in that time. Most of the Strip has been destroyed, millions have been forcefully displaced, and Tel Aviv stands accused of war crimes and genocide in the International Court of Justice as a result. International organisations, including the UN, have been raising the alarm that Gaza is entering a man-made famine as a result of Israel's complete siege of the Palestinian enclave.
A famine is now imminent in the northern part of the Gaza Strip.
אנחנו מטילים מצור מוחלט על העיר עזה. אין חשמל, אין מזון, אין מים, אין דלק. הכל סגור.
The projections are alarming. A group of British and American epidemiologists have warned that between 48,210 and 193,180 Palestinians will die in Gaza from both war and disease connected to the famine if nothing changes. But what is famine, and why do some fear it could unleash a catastrophe unlike anything we've seen in Palestine so far?
The level of food catastrophe in Gaza is without precedent since the current monitoring systems were set up. The numbers in IPC level 5 are greater than occurred in Somalia in 2011 and any other crisis in recent history.
In 2007, Israel placed the Gaza Strip under a partial siege and restricted access to the Palestinian enclave. The previous year, Hamas beat rivals Fatah in elections, which resulted in fighting breaking out between the two. In June 2007, Hamas expelled Fatah from Gaza, and Israel responded by sealing the Strip off from the world. In 2012, documents released by Tel Aviv's Ministry of Defense revealed that between 2007 and 2010, the Israeli military calculated the number of calories they needed to allow Gazans to consume daily in order to avoid being accused of forcefully starving Palestinians. 2,279 calories per person was worked out and was in keeping with the World Health Organization's guidelines. Israel's guidelines often meant frozen salmon and low-fat yogurt could get into Gaza, but not coriander or instant coffee during this period. Israel routinely tightened and loosened its siege of the Strip over the years. In the documents, Israeli officials remarked they were putting Gaza on a diet. The purpose was to keep Gaza above starvation whilst destabilizing the Strip. In 2011, US diplomatic cables leaked by WikiLeaks contained a quote from an Israeli diplomat who said they wanted to keep Gaza's economy on the brink of collapse. After Hamas's attack on Israel on the 7th of October 2023, the Israeli Defense Minister ordered Gaza to be placed under total siege. Nothing was to get in and out of the Strip. Stopping food from entering was only part of the issue. Israeli forces began destroying civilian infrastructure needed to maintain life in Gaza. Bakeries, markets, stores, shops, factories, storage sites, fisheries, boats, ports, flour mills, and farms were among those eviscerated by Tel Aviv. Attacks on hospitals and medical facilities and their destruction not only meant people were unable to receive treatment, but also severely curtailed the Strip's ability to control disease, starvation and other medical issues. The destruction and forced displacement of people from their homes by the Israeli occupational forces has forced over 2 million Palestinians into camps where up to 600 people are forced to share a toilet and running water is not available, leading to the spread of preventable diseases. When Israel allows aid into the Strip, its soldiers shoot at Palestinians trying to collect it. The famine in Gaza is not a result of a natural occurrence nor a byproduct of war. Indeed, as famine expert Alex de Waal shows in his book Mass Starvation, famines as a result of natural causes disappeared by the 19th century, and over the course of the 20th century, all famines were the direct and deliberate result of policies taken. Famine does not happen on its own. It has been deliberately engineered, and so famine is fundamentally a political act. In March 2024, the UN International Court of Justice ordered Israel to lift all restrictions on aid from getting into the enclave and avert the famine. The decision said the court observes that Palestinians in Gaza are no longer facing only a risk of famine, but that famine is setting in. What would famine mean for Gaza? Crisis in Gaza, a scenario-based health impact projection report by the Johns Hopkins Centre for Humanitarian Health and the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, published in February 2024, offers a layout for what could happen in the besieged Gaza Strip up until August 2024. Divided into 3 scenarios, which are ceasefire, status quo, and escalation, it calculates excess mortality in the Palestinian territory. Under a ceasefire situation, if we exclude disease, between 4,200 and 11,740 Palestinians will die as a result of their injuries, wounds, and other issues directly related to the war. But if disease is included in these numbers, which is caused by displacement, injury, starvation, homelessness, breakdown in sanitation, over-cramped living conditions, poor hygiene, and lack of health care, the death toll could rise to 80,370. If the status quo persists, meaning the war continues as is, between 48,210 and 72,830 could die by August. But if disease is factored in, this death toll could reach as high as 193,180. And lastly, if Israel escalates its military campaign, excluding disease, Gaza could witness 62,350 to 92,650 deaths. But with disease, this range multiplies to 259,680. If these projections are accurate, death from disease could outpace mortality directly caused by Israel's aerial and ground warfare. It is important to remember here that these disease-related deaths would not be happening if Israel had not launched its war on Gaza. Disease and famine are very closely linked, and for a place to be declared a famine, high death rate from disease needs to be present.
Famine is usually seen as an episode of extreme hunger, crisis in access to food associated with larger numbers of people dying from hunger and disease. Now, some 20 years ago, because of the lack of an agreed definition, food security experts came together to agree on a set of metrics. And what they came up with is called the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification System, known as the IPC for short. And this measures the intensity of a famine in a particular area, and it has 5 phases, which are conveniently colored on maps. So green is normal, yellow is phase 2, which is stressed, orangey brown is phase 3, which is crisis, which is when humanitarian agencies start getting alarmed. Red is emergency. Now, in the original discussion, the question of defining famine at this stage was raised. And in emergency, children are already dying from hunger and disease. So you can have a large population in emergency, as in Yemen, as in South Sudan, with a huge death toll over many months and years, without the fifth stage, which is a dark blood red, famine actually being declared. Now, what we have in Gaza today is overwhelmingly emergency, with some very substantial proportion tipping over into the fifth phase, which is catastrophe and famine. But it's important to understand that even in emergency, significant numbers of children are dying of hunger and disease. It is already disastrous.
The general metric experts use for determining a famine is if there is at least 2 deaths per 10,000 a day from disease or hunger. About half of these deaths are of children. Apart from disease, the health impact of famine include both under and malnutrition. Both of these conditions of starvation lead to wasting, being underweight, and lacking vital nutrients, which in turn weakens the immune system. Diarrhea commonly accompanies starvation too. Part of the issue with treating victims of starvation is that there comes a point where the individual can no longer eat solid foods, or if they do, they will die. In most societies, where one person is extremely starved or malnutritioned, they are admitted to an intensive care unit in a hospital and restored to health through a treatment program, which gradually reintroduces liquids and builds up calorie intake. But for those in famine, this treatment is needed quickly and at a mass level.
You need therapeutic feeding, because if somebody who is in a state, adult or child, in a state of extreme malnutrition, if they're just given regular food just like that, it can be very dangerous. So they need therapeutic feeding for sufficient time that they can begin to regain their strength and health before they move on to a regular diet. So it's not just a question of the number of truckloads of food that can be brought in. It is the establishment of that entire infrastructure for the nutritional rehabilitation of an exceptionally stressed, undernourished population.
Without a ceasefire and a total lifting of the Israeli siege, infrastructure required to fight off famine will be severely restricted. Currently, there are no international laws obliging states to take action if a famine is declared or suspected, unlike the case with genocide. But there are a number of laws against forced starvation of a population. While there are no laws requiring countries to take action, sometimes the declaration of famine pressurizes countries to do so.
In Somalia in 2011, when 490,000 people were in famine conditions under the IPC scale, and some 250,000 died of starvation, the declaration of famine was the occasion on which the United States began to find a humanitarian workaround for restrictions on aid to Somalia, because a terrorist group, Al-Shabaab, was operating there in the areas where famine was occurring.
The impact a famine has is immense in both the immediate, medium and long term. Researchers examining the 1944 to 1945 Dutch winter famine, which was caused after the Nazi occupational forces decided to collectively punish the local population for being involved in resistance efforts, found that even after the famine was over, those who lived through it continued to experience health-related issues for the rest of their lives. Children who were in utero during the famine and born before or just after it had shorter lifespans than those born before or after it. This is despite the fact they had excellent access to food, medicine and other related items after famine ended, according to a 2013 Columbia University study. Other studies of fetuses during the Dutch famine revealed that when a fetus experiences malnutrition, it impacts the birth weight and health outcomes for the rest of their lives. Fetuses who experience pregnancy malnutrition during the first 3 months of pregnancy, but were well fed during the rest of it, were born of a normal weight. However, they experienced higher rates of obesity and other related illnesses than the general population. Fetuses who experienced malnutrition in the last few months of pregnancy were born underweight and remained small throughout their lifetime despite excellent access to food and nutrition. This suggests genetic changes may occur during a famine. Even people who are older at the time of the Dutch famine were impacted throughout their life. One of the most famous survivors of famine was Hollywood actress Audrey Hepburn, who was in her teens when the Dutch hunger ended. The Breakfast at Tiffany's star was famous for her slim figure. According to her family, she enjoyed a rich and varied diet including pasta, grains, chocolate, and ate a little bit of everything. Despite this, she weighed 110 pounds or 49 kilos, had a 22-inch waist, and throughout her life, people assumed she had an eating disorder. She suffered from a range of health problems, many of which are suspected to be linked to famine. Elsewhere, numerous research has shown children exposed to famine may suffer from stunted growth, meaning they are shorter than they would otherwise be. Beyond health challenges, the memory and trauma of famine leaves a lasting scar for generations.
Famine is also a massive social trauma. One of my legal colleagues at the Fletcher School at Tufts, Tom Dannenbaum, has called starvation siege a crime of societal torture. And what he means by that is that as people are forced to do anything they can to survive, just to get food and the essentials, they're required to violate important social taboos and practices. They cannot pursue all those normal social activities, maintain those social bonds that keep a family or society together. And historians who've studied the memory of famines in the past, for example, those who studied starvation in Ireland in the 1840s, or indeed concentration camp survivors after World War II, people such as Primo Levi. What they describe is everyone being reduced to thieves and being incredibly selfish. So imagine if you have some food and you are preparing it for your own children, but there's an equally hungry family next door, and you don't share it with them. And the feeling of shame, of humiliation, of not being able to extend the most basic human gesture is profoundly humiliating and shaming. And this is a trauma that lives with people for their lives. In fact, it's an intergenerational trauma too. It took several generations for there to be public commemoration of the Great Hunger in Ireland.
To date, dozens of Palestinians have died of malnutrition as a result of the famine in the Strip, with rights groups warning that many more fatalities may have taken place without being accounted for because of people's inability to reach medical centres and seek help. The situation in the enclave is getting worse every day as Israel continues its deliberate siege and bombing campaign, which restricts and targets aid convoys. If action isn't taken to stop this, Palestinians face generations of hardship, medical problems, the disintegration of society, and a catastrophe far worse than anything we've seen to date.